equal time sharing presumption for parents with their children. And obviously that equal time sharing presumption is important for paternity cases as well, because now not only do husband fathers, but also unmarried fathers have that presumption that equal time with both parents is in the best interest of the child. And that's now written into the statutes as of July. And one other change I didn't get a chance to touch on when we were talking about divorce law changes was that for both divorce and paternity, now if you have a long distance parenting plan where you're splitting the time between two states or two, cities that are far apart, even in Florida, that now if the parent moves closer in the same town as the children where they attend school, that parent can now petition the court to have a change going to that equal time sharing presumption of their parenting plan. Before, that move was not enough of a change to change a long distance plan. So that was a good positive change that the legislature enacted in July.
So, Christine, I want to be clear.
Yes.
Because we meet more and more young people who have children together, but they're not married. And so prior to July of 2023, if you're a father of a child, you're not married to the mother, and they go their separate ways, you're saying prior to July, he is the father. What kind of rights did he as a father have as far as visitation and custody with the child? None at all, or completely at the discretion of the court?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because prior to July, and to me this is the most significant change for unmarried fathers, prior to July, the mother was designated as the only natural guardian if the parents were not married. So that mother would have entitlement to all parental responsibility and time with the child unless one of two things happened. Either dad married mom, but obviously if they've split, that's not likely to happen, or he'd have to open a court case, a paternity court case, to get his rights established. Now we have a situation where if the parents, when the child was born, most likely this would have happened if they signed a stipulation or a voluntary acknowledgement, and that would be evident by seeing dad's name on the birth certificate. Now that stipulation or voluntary acknowledgement establishes legal paternity and puts that unmarried father in the place of like a married father. So he'd have the same kind of rights as a husband who was divorcing. They'd still have to open a court case to get that parenting plan, and he'd still be subject to that presumption of equal time. But he wouldn't have no rights, right off the bat. That's the big change.
That's a huge change, and good for Florida legislature for passing that law. That's certainly makes sense.
Yes, I was
very
happy to see that. Yes.
Are you saying that this is qualified by the father having his name on the birth certificate?
Yes, it gets very specific and detailed. So I wouldn't say just the dad's name on the birth certificate, boom, you've got the legal rights. There's some specific details. I'd be happy to talk to anyone about that if they had questions about that. But it basically goes back to when they signed the stipulation or acknowledgement. That's what got him on the birth certificate. But then there's it gets very technical. There's like a 6-month period where somebody can contest his name on the birth certificate and things like that. So I don't want to say, boom, you're got all these rights because your name's on the birth certificate, because there could be some very specific details that might challenge that.
I don't. You and I talked about more and more young people these days are having children together than they're not getting married. Okay, that much we know, and I can't imagine them saying we're going to put together a stipulation to sign. I can't imagine that being standard policy for young people having children. But what may be more standard policy is that they agree that when the child is born, they're putting both their names on the birth certificate. And
right, they have to do that acknowledgement or stipulation to get him on the birth certificate. If they don't sign that, then he's not on the birth certificate.
Okay, so I'm not familiar with that, Christine. So young people, not married, have a child, there's a form that has to be filled out and signed by both mom and dad, be able to put dad's name on the birth certificate. That's what you're saying.
I think that's all usually done right there in the hospital when the child's born. And this would obviously be a situation where mom and dad are together and happy with each other.
Yeah.
And so, mom wants the child to have dad's last name is usually the kind of situation for that. So you'll see him on the birth certificate. Because sometimes if they're not together at the birth, mom might be like, nope, he's just going to have my last name and I'm the only parent on the birth certificate. And that happens a lot too. So obviously if dad never got on the birth certificate, you're going to have to go back to square one to the paternity case in full, and he won't have any rights until he gets that court order then.
So we're kind of focusing on these young people who are together and happy and having children. They just don't happen to be married, and so that they both end up being on the birth certificate, all good and wonderful. We now know that the Florida law says that just by doing so, if they go their separate ways, the father's going to have equal custody and visitation with his child. That's all good news. Did anything change as far as what his financial obligation would be to that child, or has it always been, whether you're married or not married, if you're a father of a child, you're going to have the same kind of financial responsibility whether you're married or not married?
Well, that's an excellent question again, too. And it's not, a slam dunk that they get the equal time. It's just a presumption of equal time.
Exactly.
So if there's certain circumstances, and there's about 20 different criteria that a judge looks at as to whether or not that equal time should be adjusted or not. But going into the financial aspect of it, the more time, basically it comes down to, if you've got equal time, then it comes down to who makes more money and who's got the kid on their insurance. That's where, it's a formula and it's a form that you fill out and everything, and it's, math. So you just kind of determine based on the incomes, based on who's insuring the child. If there is a discrepancy between the incomes, then that would be the child support amount. But quite a while ago, probably 10 or more years ago, the legislature incorporated they instituted where 20% or more of a parent, which would be probably every other weekend and some extra time in the summer, would get you to about that 20%, which that was typically what we saw a lot, like 10 or more years ago, fathers doing the every other weekend thing, right? Now dads are wanting to be much more involved, wanting to get as much time as they can. So the more time you have with your child, the lower your child support is going to be. And if there is child support at all, if the parties are making equal money, and it doesn't, so in a situation like that, it would be like a wash that neither parent would owe the other child support. Sometimes the moms end up owing the dad's child support because they're the bigger earners. That just depends. Yep. So
I think that's a very important point to make, and that is that this has really only come into being in the last 10 or so years, because it used to be the father's paying child support no matter how much time the child happens to be with dad. Now within 10 years ago, it's saying, hey, the more time the child is with dad, the less child support he's going to pay, because the child's with the dad more. He's paying for more food and everything else that goes along with it.
Right. It just makes common sense that if the child's going to be with each parent half the time that parent is putting a roof over their head, clothes on their back, food in their belly. So, there's got to be some kind of a difference other than, one parent paying for everything. Just makes sense.
Christine, thank you so much for bringing us up to speed and informing us about this very important change. I appreciate it. And we will certainly be Chris and I will be more informed about this so that we can properly advise people going down the road. How would people reach out to your law firm, Christine?
Well, I'm at lomaslawpa.com. That's my website. So you can check me out and check out my information. And best thing would be to call my office number there, Monday through Friday, 9 to 3. And we'll return within 24 hours, your calls.
All right, everybody. This is Attorney Christine Lomas. Christine, thank you for joining us today and educating us about this important topic, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you, Christine.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate it. Thank you.